They say the most dangerous mistakes are made not in sudden fits of anger, but in cold, ruthless calculation. When Nathan Brooks looked across the polished mahogany table of the executive boardroom, expecting to meet the faceless corporate overlord who had just handed him the world, his heart didn't just drop, it flatlined. There, sitting in the chairman's seat, casually twirling the cheap plastic ring he had won for her at a county fair 3 years ago, was the woman he had mercilessly discarded. The woman he had called too small-minded for his ambitions. He had traded a diamond for a shiny, hollow pebble. And now he was about to learn that the diamond owned his entire life. To the outside world, Nathan Brooks and Odetta Sterling were the quintessential struggling, upwardly mobile millennial couple living in the windy, unforgiving heart of Chicago. They shared a cramped, third-floor walk-up apartment in Logan Square, where the radiator clanked violently in the winter and the windows let in a relentless draft. Nathan was a senior financial analyst at Vanguard Innovations, a rapidly expanding tech equity firm downtown. He was a man entirely constructed out of ambition and deeply rooted insecurities. Growing up in a solidly lower middle-class family in Ohio, Nathan viewed wealth not just as money, but as armor. He spent a third of his monthly paycheck on tailored Italian suits, meticulously polished Oxford shoes, and a lease on a BMW 3 Series he could barely afford. He believed that to become powerful, one had to expertly mimic the powerful. Odetta, on the other hand, was his polar opposite. When they met at a local indie bookstore, Nathan was charmed by her effortless, bohemian grace. She wore oversized, faded vintage sweaters, rarely wore makeup, and drove a battered 2008 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper. She told him she worked remotely as a freelance data consultant, spending her days tapping away on an old laptop at a corner table in a neighborhood coffee shop called The Roasted Bean. For the first 2 years, their dynamic worked. Odetta was Nathan's safe harbor, the warm, unpretentious retreat from the cutthroat corporate warfare he waged daily. But as Nathan approached his 30th birthday, the pressure to secure a highly coveted vice president position at Vanguard began to warp him. He started looking at Odetta not as his partner, but as a liability. "You need to network more, Odetta," Nathan snapped one Tuesday evening, aggressively loosening his silk tie as he paced the scuffed hardwood floor of their living room. "I invited Arthur Pendleton, my managing director, to that charity gala next week. The tickets were $500 each. We have to look the part. You can't just wear that same black dress you bought at Macy's 4 years ago." Odetta looked up from her book, her green eyes calm but perceptive. "There's nothing wrong with the dress, Nathan. It's classic, and Arthur doesn't strike me as the type to care about labels. That is exactly why you'll never understand my world." Nathan groaned, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "It's all about optics. Success is a language, Odetta, and you refuse to speak it. You're comfortable making 40 grand a year doing obscure spreadsheets for small businesses. I want to build an empire. I need someone beside me who looks like she belongs in a penthouse, not a thrift store." Odetta didn't yell. She never did. She just marked her page, set her book down, and stared at him. "I'm comfortable with who I am, Nathan. If you're building an empire just to prove you're better than the people you grew up with, you're building it on sand." Nathan scoffed, grabbing his briefcase. "I'm going back to the office. Don't wait up." As the apartment door slammed shut, Odetta let out a long, measured sigh. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Eleanor?" "It's Odetta," she said, her tone entirely shifting from the soft-spoken girlfriend to something sharper, more commanding. "Yes, I know what time it is. Listen, I need you to authorize the transfer of 80 million into the Vanguard Innovations holding account by tomorrow morning. We're moving forward with the aggressive acquisition phase. And Eleanor? Call the family tailor in Milan. Tell them I need a gown for a gala next Thursday. Something subtle but unmistakable. What Nathan didn't know, what no one in Chicago knew, was that Odetta was not a freelance consultant making $40,000 a year. She was Odetta Sterling, the sole heir and invisible CEO of Sterling Cross Enterprises, a multi-billion-dollar private equity behemoth founded by her late grandfather. She had spent the last 5 years living anonymously, deliberately stripping away the sycophants and the parasites that usually swarmed a woman worth over $12 billion. She wanted to know if she could be loved for herself, without the armor of her family's wealth. For a long time, she thought Nathan loved her. But the cracks were showing, and the man she loved was rapidly being consumed by his own hollow greed. The charity gala at the Drake Hotel was a glittering sea of diamonds, ego, and champagne. Nathan arrived anxious, desperate to make an impression on Arthur Pendleton and the other senior partners at Vanguard. Odetta arrived looking breathtaking. The gown Eleanor had procured was a vintage, custom piece of dark emerald silk that flowed like water. It had no visible logos, no ostentatious jewels, but to a trained eye it screamed incalculable, generational wealth. Unfortunately, Nathan's eyes were not trained for subtlety. They were trained for flash. Halfway through the evening, while Odetta was politely listening to a tedious story from one of Arthur's junior associates, Nathan gravitated toward the hotel bar. It was there he bumped into Victoria Kensington. Victoria was everything Odetta was not. She was a walking billboard of aggressive, newly minted luxury. She wore a tight, sequined Prada dress, her wrists heavy with Cartier bangles, and she carried a limited edition Birkin bag that she made sure everyone saw. More importantly to Nathan, Victoria was the daughter of Richard Kensington, a highly influential regional bank executive who handled massive commercial loans for tech startups, exactly the kind of clientele Vanguard Innovations coveted. "You're Nathan, right? The rising star at Vanguard," Victoria purred, swirling her martini. She had been briefed on the guest list and knew exactly who the ambitious players were. Nathan's ego swelled instantly. "I try to hold my own. And you must be Victoria. I recognized you from the Chicago Business Journal feature." They spent the next hour locked in conversation. Victoria talked about her father's yacht in Miami, her recent ski trip to Gstaad, and how she was looking to invest in the tech sector. She subtly dropped hints that her father was looking for a new point man at Vanguard to handle a major new portfolio. To Nathan, Victoria wasn't just a woman. She was a golden elevator to the executive floor. She was the final puzzle piece in his meticulously crafted image. He looked across the room at Odetta, who was quietly sipping sparkling water, looking beautifully understated. In Nathan's mind, understated equated to insignificant. He made his decision right then and there. The breakup happened 3 days later. Nathan didn't even have the decency to do it in the privacy of their apartment. He took Odetta to a mid-tier, obnoxiously loud steakhouse downtown, likely hoping the public setting would prevent her from making a scene. "We need to talk about our trajectories, Odetta," Nathan began, not even touching his expensive ribeye. He refused to look her in the eye, staring instead at his reflection in his polished butter knife. "Trajectories?" Odetta repeated softly, setting her fork down. "Are we talking about our lives, or a quarterly earnings report?" "This is exactly what I mean," Nathan sighed, adopting a tone of deep, patronizing pity. "You treat everything like a joke. You have no drive. I am on the verge of making vice president. I'm entering a tier of society where connections, appearances, and ruthless ambition matter. I need a partner who can navigate that world. Someone who isn't satisfied with mediocrity. Odetta's heart ached, not from the loss of the man sitting in front of her, because that man had died months ago, but for the 3 years of her life she had wasted believing in him. So, you found someone who speaks your language. Is that it? Nathan finally looked up, a flicker of guilt quickly overshadowed by defensiveness. Victoria and I share the same vision. Her family understands the pressures of high-level finance. It's nothing personal, Odetta. It's just an evolution. We've outgrown each other. I'll pay the remainder of the lease on the Logan Square apartment. You can keep the furniture. He offered her a buyout, like she was a failing subsidiary. Odetta stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. She didn't cry. She didn't throw her water in his face. She simply reached into her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and placed it on the table to cover her half of the drinks. "You're right, Nathan," she said, her voice dropping to a cool, crystalline register he had never heard before. "It's nothing personal. It's just business. Good luck with your empire." She stood up and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the crisp Chicago night. She climbed into her beat-up Honda Civic, started the engine, and dialed a number on her Bluetooth console. "Eleanor," Odetta said, the heartbreak entirely gone from her voice, replaced by cold, hard steel. "Accelerate the Vanguard Innovations timeline. I want controlling interest by the end of the quarter. And have our legal team start drafting restructuring plans. It's time I took a more active role in our investments." The next 4 months were a whirlwind of dizzying success for Nathan Brooks. Buoyed by his new relationship with Victoria Kensington, he strutted through the halls of Vanguard Innovations like a king in waiting. Victoria made sure everyone knew they were dating, frequently dropping by the office in her Porsche, dripping in designer logos, and loudly inviting Arthur Pendleton and other executives to her father's exclusive country club. Nathan was convinced he was playing the game flawlessly. When Vanguard landed a massive, unexpected infusion of capital from a shadowy private equity firm, leading to the creation of a brand new, highly lucrative wealth management division, Nathan felt the stars aligning. 2 weeks later, Arthur called Nathan into his corner office. "Nathan, take a seat," Arthur said. Arthur was an older, shrewd man who had survived 3 decades in finance by knowing when to speak and when to listen. Today, he looked uncharacteristically tense. "Thank you, Arthur," Nathan said smoothly, flashing his polished smile. "I assume this is about the new division?" "It is," Arthur replied, sliding a thick manila folder across the desk. The board had a lengthy discussion this morning. The anonymous firm that just injected $50 million into our operating budget has stipulated certain structural changes. They specifically requested that you be named the senior vice president of the new division. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Senior vice president. He had bypassed 2 levels of management in a single leap. His mind instantly went to Victoria. Her father must have pulled a massive string behind the scenes. This was it. The ultimate validation of his ruthless choices. "Arthur, I am honored," Nathan managed to say, puffing his chest out. "I won't let you or the board down. I knew my networking with the Kensington family would pay off for the firm." Arthur paused, an unreadable expression passing over his weathered face. He looked at Nathan as if analyzing a dead bug on a microscope slide. "The Kensington family had nothing to do with this capital injection, Nathan. Richard Kensington handles small-time commercial loans. The entity that bought out our majority shares is operating on a global scale. We don't even know the name of the individual heading the trust. All we know is that they specifically requested you for this role." Nathan frowned slightly, momentarily confused, but his towering ego quickly smoothed it over. If not Victoria's father, then his own sheer brilliance must have caught the eye of an anonymous billionaire investor. He was a prodigy. Well, whoever they are, they recognize talent, Nathan smirked. For the next 2 months, Nathan was insufferable. He moved out of his apartment and signed a lease on a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan. He bought Victoria a $20,000 diamond necklace to celebrate his promotion. He demanded absolute perfection from his new subordinates, firing 2 junior analysts in his first week just to establish dominance. He was flying high, completely oblivious to the fact that the higher the altitude, the deadlier the fall. Meanwhile, high above the city, in a hyper-secure suite at the Waldorf Astoria, Odetta Sterling sat in an ergonomic leather chair, watching multiple monitors tracking global markets. Her friend and executive assistant, Eleanor, walked in holding a tablet. "He took the bait, Odetta," Eleanor said, tapping the screen. "Nathan has authorized 3 highly speculative, extremely risky tech investments using the new division's funds, exactly as you predicted he would to prove his genius." Odetta took a sip of her matcha tea, her eyes locked on the data. She hadn't just given Nathan a promotion, she had handed him enough rope to hang his entire career. She knew his psychological profile intimately. She knew that if given unchecked power and an inflated sense of his own invincibility, Nathan would bypass standard compliance protocols to chase a massive, headline-grabbing return. "Are the compliance traps set?" Odetta asked softly. "Perfectly," Eleanor grinned. "The moment those startups fail, and they will fail within the next 10 days, due to the supply chain blockages we already foresee, the losses will trigger an automatic internal audit. An audit that will go straight to the chairman of the board." "Which is me," Odetta murmured. "When do you want to unmask?" Eleanor asked, leaning against the desk. Odetta turned her chair to face the massive window, looking out over the Chicago skyline. She thought of the cold steakhouse. She thought of the way Nathan had looked at her like she was dirt on his shoe, simply because she didn't wear a Prada label. "We have the annual shareholders meeting at the end of the month," Odetta said, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "I think it's time the new majority shareholder finally made a public appearance. Let's invite all the senior vice presidents. Make sure Nathan has a front row seat. The view from a penthouse in Chicago's Gold Coast is intoxicating. For Nathan Brooks, staring out at the freezing, dark expanse of Lake Michigan from his new floor-to-ceiling windows, it felt like looking down from Mount Olympus. It had been 6 weeks since his unprecedented promotion to senior vice president at Vanguard Innovations, and he was completely blind to the fact that his kingdom was built on a fault line. His relationship with Victoria Kensington had escalated from a strategic alliance into a relentless competition of conspicuous consumption. They dined exclusively at places like Billionaire and Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, where Nathan would drop $2,000 on a single bottle of Cabernet just to ensure the waitstaff remembered his name. Victoria demanded nothing less. She was a creature sustained by envy. If other women weren't glaring at her purse or her boyfriend's platinum card, she considered the evening a failure. "My father is hosting a private regatta in Newport next month," Victoria casually mentioned one evening, running a manicured finger around the rim of her crystal wine. My glass. She was draped across Nathan's custom Italian leather sofa, looking thoroughly bored. "He expects us there. It's a good opportunity for you, Nathan. Bradley Whitmore and a few other hedge fund titans will be attending." Nathan's stomach tightened. A weekend in Newport with the East Coast elite meant chartering a private jet, securing a luxury rental property, and bleeding cash he didn't actually have yet. His new salary was astronomical, but his burn rate was apocalyptic. "Consider it done," Nathan lied smoothly, flashing a confident smile. To fund this relentless lifestyle and prove his worth to the anonymous billionaire who had supposedly handpicked him, Nathan needed a massive, historic win at Vanguard. He bypassed the safe, steady municipal bonds and blue-chip stocks that Arthur Pendleton favored. Instead, Nathan zeroed in on 3 highly volatile, emerging tech startups dealing in rare earth mineral extraction and semiconductor manufacturing. It was an aggressive, high-wire act. If it worked, Vanguard's new division would post a 400% return in a single quarter, cementing Nathan as a Wall Street legend. Harrison Caldwell, Vanguard's notoriously strict chief risk officer, saw the danger immediately. Harrison was a veteran of the 2008 financial crisis, a man who saw ghosts in every overly optimistic spreadsheet. He cornered Nathan near the elevators on a Tuesday morning. "Nathan, I've reviewed the authorization forms for the Apex Logic and Cobalt Dynamics acquisitions," Harrison said, his voice a low, warning rumble. "You're heavily overleveraged. If there's even a minor hiccup in the Taiwanese shipping lanes, these companies will hemorrhage cash. You're exposing 20% of the division's operating capital to severe, unmitigated risk." Nathan adjusted his bespoke Tom Ford tie, looking down his nose at the older man. "Harrison, this isn't 1998. The market moves at the speed of light. The new majority shareholder didn't put me in this chair to play it safe and collect 2% dividends. They want a predator. I'm giving them one." "It's reckless," Harrison insisted, stepping closer. "Standard compliance requires a secondary sign-off for capital allocations exceeding $15 million. I am officially withholding my signature." Nathan chuckled, a cold, patronizing sound. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Here's the reality, Harrison. I answer directly to the chairman of the board now. You answer to Arthur, and Arthur is 2 years away from a retirement home. If you want to play a bureaucratic game of chicken with the man who just brought $50 million into this firm, go ahead. But I promise you, by Friday, you'll be clearing out your desk." Harrison's jaw tightened. He knew a runaway train when he saw one. He stepped back, his eyes flashing with a mix of pity and disgust. "I'll note my objections in the official ledger. When this blows up, Nathan, your signature will be the only one on the wreckage." "Good," Nathan sneered, stepping into the elevator. "I want all the credit." In his desperation to prove himself, Nathan made his fatal mistake. He utilized an archaic, rarely used executive loophole to bypass Harrison's risk assessment, forging ahead with the acquisitions. He wired $45 million of Vanguard's capital into the fragile tech startups. High above the city, in her pristine, silent suite at the Waldorf Astoria, Odetta Sterling watched the transaction clear on her secure terminal. "He did it," Eleanor said, standing behind Odetta's chair, holding a steaming cup of espresso. "He actually bypassed the chief risk officer. The arrogance is almost impressive." Odetta didn't smile. Her green eyes were fixed on the glowing numbers. "It's not arrogance, Eleanor. It's desperation. He's drowning in his own image, trying to keep up with Victoria Kensington's father. Speaking of Richard Kensington, did our analysts finish the quiet audit on his regional bank?" Eleanor pulled up a secondary file on her tablet, grinning like a predator. "You were right, Odetta. The Kensington family is a facade. Richard Kensington's commercial loan portfolio is 90% toxic. They are deeply over-leveraged. Victoria isn't dating Nathan because he's a rising star. She's dating him because her father desperately needs a bailout from Vanguard's new division to avoid federal indictment." Odetta nodded slowly, the final pieces of the chessboard snapping into place. "So, Victoria is a parasite looking for a host, and Nathan is a host who thinks he caught a prize. Let them feed on each other. Execute the short positions on the semiconductor supply chains. Let's trigger the collapse. The unraveling of Nathan Brooks didn't happen slowly. It happened with the terrifying, violent speed of an avalanche. It started on a Thursday morning, exactly 10 days after Nathan had authorized the massive capital transfer. He was sitting in his glass office, browsing real estate listings in Newport, when the Bloomberg terminal on his desk began flashing red. First, it was a subtle dip. A major cargo ship had mysteriously been delayed in the Suez Canal, causing a bottleneck for raw materials. By noon, the delay escalated into a full-blown international trade dispute involving tariffs on rare earth minerals. By 2 p.m., the stock prices of Apex Logic and Cobalt Dynamics, the two companies holding $45 million of Vanguard's money, began to freefall. Nathan's office door burst open. It was Arthur Pendleton, his face completely drained of color. Behind him stood Harrison Caldwell, looking grimly vindicated. "What is happening, Nathan?" Arthur demanded, his voice trembling as he pointed at the television screens on the trading floor outside, which were broadcasting the tech sector's sudden hemorrhage. "Tell me you hedged our positions. Tell me you listened to Harrison." Nathan stood up, his heart hammering wildly against his ribs. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead, instantly ruining his carefully manicured appearance. "Arthur, it's a temporary market correction. The algorithms predicted a slight dip before the quarterly earnings." "A slight dip?" Harrison interrupted, slamming a thick file onto Nathan's desk. "Cobalt Dynamics just filed for emergency bankruptcy protection in Delaware. Their primary manufacturing facility in Taipei halted production. You bypassed my risk assessment. You forged ahead without secondary authorization. As of 3 minutes ago, the division is down $32 million. Nathan felt the floor drop out from beneath him. The air in the room suddenly felt impossibly thin. 32 million. It was a number so catastrophic it didn't even register as money. It registered as a death sentence. I can fix this," Nathan stammered, loosening his tie as he struggled to breathe. "I just need liquidity. A bridge loan to cover the margin calls until the market stabilizes. I know people." "You don't have time to know people," Arthur roared, slamming his fist on the desk, the polished executive veneer entirely shattered. "The automated internal audit tripped 20 minutes ago. The new majority shareholder, the chairman, has been notified of the massive capital loss. We've been summoned." "Summoned?" Nathan choked out. "There is an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning at 9, Arthur said, his eyes filled with a terrifying mixture of fury and absolute panic. "The chairman is flying in. You are going to stand in front of whoever owns this firm and explain how you incinerated their capital in less than 2 months. If you can't cover this margin, Nathan, you won't just be fired. You will be facing federal fraud charges for bypassing risk compliance." When Arthur and Harrison left, Nathan collapsed into his leather chair, gasping for air. The walls of his glass office felt like a fishbowl, and he was suffocating. He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and dialed Victoria's number. She picked up on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. "Nathan, I'm at the spa. This better be important." "Victoria, I need your father," Nathan said, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "I need a short-term commercial loan, $35 million, just for a week. I can pay him back with exorbitant interest once Vanguard releases the contingency funds." There was a long, chilling silence on the other end of the line. "$35 million?" Victoria repeated, her tone dropping its usual playful purr, replacing it with something cold and sharp. "Are you insane?" "My father doesn't do favors like that, Nathan. What happened?" "The tech investments tanked. Nathan admitted, swallowing his pride. "If I don't show up tomorrow with a bridge loan to cover the losses, I'm ruined." "Victoria, please. We're a team. You said your father was looking for a partner in Vanguard." Victoria let out a short, harsh laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "Nathan, you idiot! My father wasn't looking for a partner. He was looking for a mark. His bank is on the verge of defaulting. We needed your capital to save us. If you're broke, you are entirely useless to me." "Victoria, don't call me again," she snapped. "I'm blocking this number. Good luck with the SEC." The line went dead. Nathan stared at his phone, the reality of his situation crashing over him like a tidal wave of ice water. Victoria hadn't loved him. She hadn't even respected him. She had looked at him the exact same way he had looked at Odetta, as an asset to be exploited and ultimately discarded. He had traded genuine, unconditional loyalty for a glittering, poisonous fake. And now he was entirely alone, facing the wrath of a faceless billionaire who held his entire life in the palm of their hand. He spent the night pacing his empty, echoing penthouse, drinking straight scotch, trying to formulate a defense, a lie, anything that could save him. But there was no escape. The next morning, the sky over Chicago was the color of bruised iron. Nathan put on his most expensive suit, though it felt heavy and restrictive, like a shroud. He walked into the Vanguard Innovations building, ignoring the whispers and the stares of the analysts on the trading floor. Everyone knew. The scent of blood was in the water. He took the private elevator up to the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor. The room was already full. Arthur Pendleton sat at the end of the massive mahogany table, looking 10 years older. Harrison Caldwell sat next to him, his arms crossed. The remaining board members sat in tense, terrified silence. At the head of the table, the chairman's seat was turned around, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the city. Nathan stood at the opposite end, clutching his briefcase like a shield. His mouth was dry as dust. I have a prepared statement regarding the Apex Logic acquisitions," Nathan began, his voice shaking violently despite his desperate attempt to sound confident. "I admit there were unforeseen market fluctuations, but the core strategy—" The high-backed leather chair slowly swiveled around. Nathan's words died in his throat. His briefcase slipped from his trembling, sweaty fingers, hitting the thick carpet with a dull, heavy thud. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. Sitting in the chairman's seat, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal-grey designer suit that cost more than Nathan's car, was Odetta Sterling. She wasn't wearing a faded vintage sweater. She wasn't holding a paperback book. She sat with the absolute, terrifying stillness of a predator that had just cornered its prey. Her green eyes locked onto Nathan's, cold and entirely devoid of the warmth he used to rely on. And on her right hand, casually tapping against the polished mahogany table, was the cheap, plastic red ring he had won for her at a county fair 3 years ago. "Please, Nathan," Odetta said, her voice smooth, calm, and echoing with the immense weight of a $12 billion empire. "Don't stop on my account. Tell me more about your core strategy." The silence that descended upon the 42nd floor executive boardroom of Vanguard Innovations was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical, suffocating weight. It was the kind of heavy, terminal quiet that usually precedes a catastrophic explosion or a fatal diagnosis. Nathan Brooks stood frozen at the far end of the sprawling mahogany table. His mind, usually sharp and capable of processing complex financial algorithms in seconds, entirely fractured. It shattered into 1,000 incoherent, panicking pieces. He stared at the woman sitting at the head of the table, his brain frantically, desperately trying to bridge the impossible chasm between the reality he knew and the nightmare unfolding before him. He tried to reconcile the image of the soft-spoken girl who used to read dog-eared paperbacks in their drafty, radiator-clanking Logan Square apartment with the terrifyingly poised, immaculate billionaire currently holding his entire existence hostage. "Odetta," Nathan finally whispered. The word scraped out of his bone-dry throat like sandpaper over concrete. His knees trembled so violently that he had to grip the back of a leather chair just to remain standing. His bespoke Italian suit, which had made him feel like armor just an hour ago, suddenly felt like a damp, suffocating straitjacket. He looked wildly at Arthur Pendleton, his eyes wide and pleading, fully expecting the older managing director to hit a panic button and order corporate security to drag this delusional trespasser out of the building. "Arthur, what is happening? What is she doing here? This is a mistake. She's my ex-girlfriend. She works from coffee shops. She does freelance spreadsheets for mom-and-pop stores in the suburbs." Arthur Pendleton looked at Nathan not with confusion, but with a mixture of profound pity and outright disgust. He slowly adjusted his glasses, creating a deliberate, agonizing pause. "Nathan, I strongly advise you to watch your tone and mind your surroundings," Arthur said, his voice stripped of any former mentorship or warmth. "This is not a mistake. You are addressing Ms. Odetta Sterling. She is the Chief Executive Officer and sole Managing Director of Sterling Cross Enterprises. Her family's private equity trust holds the absolute controlling interest in Vanguard Innovations, as well as a majority stake in 11 other multinational financial institutions. She is the chairman of this board." Nathan's legs finally gave out entirely. He collapsed into the leather chair behind him, his briefcase slipping from his sweaty, trembling fingers and hitting the plush carpet with a dull, heavy thud. The blood drained so rapidly from his face that he looked indistinguishable from a corpse. He stared back at Odetta. She hadn't moved a muscle. She was watching him with the detached, clinical, and utterly terrifying fascination of a scientist observing a particularly pathetic insect struggling in a web it had woven itself. She wore a sharply tailored, charcoal-grey Tom Ford suit, devoid of any flashy logos or ostentatious jewels, yet projecting an aura of incalculable, generational wealth. And there, resting casually on the polished mahogany wood, was her right hand. On her index finger, catching the harsh, unforgiving glare of the recessed lighting, was the cheap, red plastic ring he had won for her at a rigged ring toss game at the Cook County Fair 3 years ago. "Freelance spreadsheets," Odetta repeated softly, her voice smooth and echoing with absolute authority. A dangerous, razor-thin smile touched the corners of her mouth. "I suppose, in a painfully reductive way, that's one method of describing the daily management of a $12 billion global equity fund. Though I must admit to you, Nathan, the hours are significantly more demanding than I led you to believe during our time together." This is a joke," Nathan stammered, his chest heaving as he fought off a full-blown panic attack. His eyes darted toward the heavy, brass-handled mahogany doors at the back of the room, frantically calculating the distance to his escape. "You set me up. The anonymous investor. The $50 million capital injection into the new division. The sudden promotion that bypassed Arthur and Harrison. It wasn't the market. It was all you. You engineered this." "Of course I engineered it, Nathan," Odetta said, her voice dropping the polite veneer, turning as cold and hard as a diamond. She leaned forward slightly, resting her forearms on the table. "But I didn't give you a promotion to reward you. I didn't give you millions in operating capital because I believed in your genius. I gave you a promotion to reveal you. I needed to see exactly what kind of man you would become when you were handed the keys to the kingdom, completely unchecked, without the character or the moral fortitude to actually wield that power. She reached out and tapped a silver fountain pen against a thick, meticulously tabbed manila folder resting in front of her. I spent 3 years living with you, Odetta continued, her green eyes piercing straight through his hollow, collapsing ego. I knew your psychological profile more intimately than you know yourself. I knew that your ambition was never actually rooted in a genuine talent for finance. It was rooted in deep, crippling, toxic insecurity. You wanted to be a god among men simply because you were terrified of being ordinary. I knew that if I put you in a position of supreme authority, surrounded by the intoxicating temptation of high-yield, high-risk assets, you wouldn't be able to help yourself. You wanted to be a Wall Street legend so desperately that you bypassed every single ethical, legal, and structural safeguard Harrison Caldwell put in place to protect this firm. Nathan felt the blood rushing to his ears, a roaring sound drowning out his rational thought. "I was trying to make the firm money," he shouted, a desperate, pathetic attempt at defiance. "I was trying to impress the board. I was securing our future." "You were trying to impress Richard Kensington," Odetta corrected him, her voice slicing through his shout like a scalpel. "Which brings me to the most tragic part of your little ascension." Odetta gestured slightly to the shadows near the corner of the expansive room. Her executive assistant, Eleanor, stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Beside Eleanor stood a tall, intimidating man with silver hair, William Haverford, Sterling Cross Enterprises' ruthless chief legal counsel. William handed a secondary, heavily redacted dossier to Arthur Pendleton. "Arthur, please distribute the executive summary to the rest of the board," Odetta instructed, without looking away from Nathan. "Nathan, while you were busy buying $20,000 Cartier necklaces and booking private jets to Newport to impress your new girlfriend, my analysts were conducting a very quiet, very thorough audit of the Kensington family's regional bank." Nathan's stomach plummeted into an endless abyss. He suddenly remembered Victoria's cold, mocking laughter on the phone an hour earlier, the way she had instantly discarded him the second she realized he was out of money. "Richard Kensington is not a banking titan," Odetta announced to the silent, breathless room. "He is operating a desperate, crumbling house of cards. His commercial loan portfolio is 90% toxic. He is currently under secret investigation and is merely weeks away from federal insolvency. His daughter, Victoria, the woman whose vision and pedigree you so eagerly traded me for, was essentially acting as a corporate honeypot. They didn't care about your networking skills. They desperately needed Vanguard's new capital division to bail them out before the Department of Justice knocked on their door. You thought you were stepping up into high society, Nathan. In reality, you were nothing but an easy mark in a desperate, low-rent grift." Gasps rippled down the table. Harrison Caldwell leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples violently, suddenly realizing just how close Vanguard had come to being completely consumed and destroyed by Nathan's catastrophic, ego-driven lack of judgment. "You played me," Nathan choked out. Hot, humiliating tears of absolute rage and complete devastation pricked his eyes. He abandoned any remaining pretense of corporate professionalism. He was a drowning man, grasping at razors, bleeding out on the boardroom floor. "We spent 3 years together, Odetta. I loved you. I provided for you. How could you be this vindictive? How could you destroy my entire life over a simple breakup?" "Do not flatter yourself," Odetta said, her voice cracking like a whip, echoing off the glass walls. "I didn't destroy your life, Nathan. I simply removed the guardrails. You got behind the wheel, pressed the accelerator to the floor, and drove the car off the cliff entirely by yourself. She stood up slowly. The sheer, unadulterated authority rolling off her was suffocating. She commanded the room with a gravity that Nathan could never hope to possess. 3 years ago, I gave you my time, my unwavering loyalty, and my love, she said, her voice dropping to a harsh, resonant whisper that carried to every corner of the room. I wanted to know if a man could love me for my mind and my heart without the armor of my family's money, and you looked at me across a table at a cheap, loud steakhouse and told me I was a liability. You told me that my satisfaction with a simple life was a disease. You told me success was a language I refused to speak. You looked me in the eye and said it wasn't personal. It was just business. Odetta reached into the breast pocket of her blazer. Slowly, deliberately, in front of Arthur Pendleton, Harrison Caldwell, and the entire executive board, she pulled out a crisp, folded $20 bill. She walked around the massive mahogany table, her heels clicking ominously like a countdown clock, until she was standing directly over him. Nathan shrank back into his chair, physically recoiling from her presence. She dropped the $20 bill directly onto his lap. "You are absolutely right, Nathan. It's just business," she whispered, her voice like cracking ice. "You are officially terminated. For cause. Effective immediately. Your reckless bypassing of risk compliance violates Section 404 of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and William Haverford will be handing all internal documentation over to the SEC this afternoon. Furthermore, pursuant to the executive liability clause you eagerly signed without reading, your personal assets are officially frozen to cover the $32 million margin call you triggered. You don't have a penthouse. You don't have a career. You don't have a future in finance. You have exactly what you had when we first met. Nothing. Get out of my building." The fall of Nathan Brooks wasn't a graceful descent. It was a high-velocity impact that left nothing but a crater. By 3:15 p.m. that Tuesday, the ruthless, mechanical efficiency of Sterling Cross Enterprises had entirely erased his presence from the 42nd floor. 2 burly corporate security officers, men who had respectfully nodded to him just that morning, escorted him out of the glass-walled skyscraper with humiliating, public precision. He was handed a single flimsy cardboard box containing a chipped Vanguard coffee mug, a dying succulent, and a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with a state senator he had met once at a charity golf outing. His company-issued encrypted smartphone was deactivated remotely while he was still in the elevator. He watched the screen go black, severing his connection to the financial world forever. When he stumbled onto the freezing Chicago pavement, the scent of blood was already in the water. He managed to hail a yellow cab back to his Gold Coast penthouse, his mind completely numb, clinging to the desperate hope that he could at least sell his Rolex collection and his custom Italian suits to hire a decent defense attorney. But when he arrived, the building's stern-faced concierge, a man Nathan had tipped $100 just yesterday, stepped forward to block his path. "I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks. Your electronic key fob has been disabled," the concierge said, his voice devoid of any former deference or warmth. "The holding company that owns your lease, a subsidiary of Sterling Cross Enterprises, voided the contract an hour ago due to your immediate termination for cause. A corporate courier dropped off this envelope for you." Nathan tore open the thick manila envelope right there on the sidewalk. It was a formal eviction notice, accompanied by an aggressive asset freeze injunction, signed by a federal judge. The $32 million margin call he had recklessly triggered wasn't just a corporate loss. Under the specific executive liability clause he had eagerly signed without reading, Blinded by the glittering title of senior vice president, he was held personally liable. His bank accounts were already frozen. His beloved BMW 3 Series, parked in the building's underground garage, was seized by a repossession agency before sunset. His meticulously curated life, the armor of wealth he had sacrificed the only woman who ever truly loved him to obtain, was locked behind a heavy mahogany door he would never open again. The ensuing legal nightmare was swift, public, and merciless. The Securities and Exchange Commission, led by a ruthless lead investigator named Special Agent Thomas Kessler, descended upon Nathan's life with surgical precision. To avoid a 10-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and deliberate circumvention of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, Nathan was forced into a grueling plea deal. He turned state's witness against the corrupt tech startups, singing like a canary in endless, windowless deposition rooms. He barely avoided prison, but the massive civil penalties levied against him wiped out every single cent he had ever saved. He was financially annihilated, permanently blacklisted from the financial industry globally, and publicly disgraced in the front pages of the Wall Street Journal. As for his golden ticket, Victoria Kensington, her downfall was equally spectacular and entirely devoid of loyalty. Less than 2 weeks after Nathan's very public firing, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation raided Richard Kensington's regional bank. The deeply toxic commercial loan portfolio Odetta's analysts had discovered finally collapsed in on itself, triggering a cascade of federal indictments. Victoria didn't call Nathan to offer comfort or solidarity. Instead, the Kensington family quietly boarded a private charter flight in the dead of night and fled to a non-extradition island in the Caribbean, leaving behind a massive trail of furious creditors, ruined investors, and a foreclosed Miami yacht. Nathan was left standing in the rubble, completely abandoned by the shallow, parasitic world he had so desperately tried to join. 18 months later, the relentless, bitter Chicago winter had finally broken, yielding to a crisp, beautifully bright spring morning. 200 miles away, in a bleak, gray suburb of Akron, Ohio, Nathan Brooks sat hunched under the flickering fluorescent lights of a strip mall tax preparation service. He wore a slightly frayed, off-the-rack polyester suit that fit him poorly. He spent his days inputting W-2s for local plumbers and substitute teachers, earning a meager $35,000 a year. He lived in his mother's damp basement, taking the municipal bus to work every morning, because his credit score was too destroyed to secure even a basic car loan. Every time he looked at his reflection in the smudged window of the bus, he saw exactly what he had always been terrified of becoming: ordinary, insignificant, and utterly trapped in a cage of his own making. Meanwhile, high above the city, in her hyper-secure, breathtaking Gold Coast penthouse, the exact same penthouse Nathan had briefly occupied, Odetta Sterling stood on her private balcony, looking out over the glittering, endless expanse of Lake Michigan. Vanguard Innovations wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. Under Odetta's direct, unyielding, and brilliant leadership, alongside Harrison Caldwell's rigorous new risk management protocols, the firm had completely recovered the catastrophic losses Nathan had caused. They had successfully pivoted the new division into sustainable, ethical, green energy infrastructure, doubling their quarterly profits and earning industry-wide acclaim. Eleanor, her ever-loyal executive assistant, stepped onto the sunlit balcony, handing Odetta a steaming mug of imported black coffee. The acquisition of the Madrid portfolio officially cleared this morning. Eleanor smiled warmly, leaning against the reinforced glass railing. The board is absolutely ecstatic, Odetta. You've stabilized the entire European theater. Good, Odetta murmured, taking a slow sip of the bitter coffee, the morning breeze catching her hair. Have the legal department draft the restructuring bonuses for Harrison's compliance team. They earned every penny. Eleanor paused, pulling a sleek tablet from under her arm. Also, our private investigators finalized their mandatory quarterly sweep of flagged individuals. Just standard protocol to ensure no retaliatory threats against the company or you. Odetta didn't look away from the calming rhythm of the water. And? He's still in Akron, Eleanor said quietly, reading the report. Still at the strip mall tax place. He actually missed a rent payment to his mother last month. He poses absolutely zero threat. Odetta stood in silence for a long, reflective moment. She didn't feel a sudden rush of vindictive triumph. She didn't feel joy at his misery or a desire to gloat over his ruin. She just felt a profound, settling peace. The universe, in all its chaotic justice, had righted itself perfectly. Nathan Brooks had spent his entire life desperately trying to build an empire of gold, only to realize he had callously traded the only real, valuable thing he ever had for a handful of hollow, worthless dust. She set her coffee mug down on the patio table and gently touched the cheap, red plastic ring she still wore on her right hand. It wasn't a symbol of a lost love anymore. It was a permanent, grounding reminder. A reminder that true value was never found in a stock portfolio, a designer label, or the desperate, fleeting applause of strangers. "Let him be, Eleanor," Odetta finally said, turning her back on the freezing lake and stepping back into the warmth and absolute security of her empire. He is exactly where he belongs. The story of Odetta and Nathan is a stark reminder that true wealth isn't measured by designer labels or corporate titles, but by the integrity we maintain when we think no one is watching. Nathan chased a hollow illusion of power, blinded by his own fragile ego, and ultimately destroyed his life by discarding the one person who valued him for who he truly was. Odetta's breathtaking triumph wasn't just in her financial dominance, but in her unyielding patience and brilliant execution of flawless karmic justice. She proved that the most formidable people in any room are often the ones who never feel the need to announce their presence. To all the listeners out there, take a hard look at the people in your corner. Are you valuing them for who they are or what they can do for you?